The evening of July 19th, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, the vast Pacific horizon stretched like a dark sheet of velvet, punctuated only by the faint shimmer of distant stars and the restless glint of waves under a waning moon. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander James Whitman leaned over the polished plotting table, eyes fixed on the radar scope. At 19 miles out, a small but unmistakable contact had appeared, her silhouette invisible to the naked eye, yet precise and undeniable in the electronic glow. A Japanese cruiser, moving cautiously, unaware that the United States Navy could now pierce the night with invisible eyes. For months, the Missouri's crew had trained in silence, in the artificial calm of radar simulators, plotting phantom targets, calculating firing solutions, and learning to trust numbers over instinct. Many officers still believed that no battleship could accurately strike an enemy beyond 12,000 yards without visual confirmation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And yet, here, in the middle of the night, the most powerful ship in the world would challenge that assumption. The irony was almost tangible. A vessel designed for brute force and intimidation, now relying entirely on electronics, mathematics, and human discipline to make death precise at distances most captains once considered impossible. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Navy had built its doctrine around visibility, optical rangefinders, and aggressive night maneuvers. Their commanders trained sailors to hunt by silhouette, by searchlight, by the faintest ripple in the water. Radar, in their estimation, was unreliable, experimental, perhaps clever, but insufficient to replace centuries of naval intuition. It was a philosophy grounded in the belief that war was won by sight and courage, by proximity, and the willingness to close the distance. Yet, by July 1945, that world was crumbling. The Missouri's radar operators had already demonstrated, in countless exercises off Pearl Harbor and the Marianas, that electronic tracking could outpace human reaction, calculate trajectories faster than any optical system, and deliver solutions to the gun crews in seconds. The theoretical had become tangible, and it would now be tested in the harsh reality of combat. Missouri's main battery consisted of 9 16-inch guns, each capable of firing 2,400 pounds of armor-piercing shell over 23 miles. The ship's engineers had meticulously calibrated the fire control systems, integrating the Mark 8 fire control radar with the range-keeping computers in the plotting room. Every operator, from the radar technician to the gunnery officer, understood the stakes. A single miscalculation could waste precious shells, or worse, allow the enemy to detect their presence and escape into the night. Lieutenant Commander Whitman's voice cut through the low hum of the bridge. All stations, prepare to engage. Range 19 miles. Bearings steady. Target acquired. Fire control. Confirm solution. The crew of Missouri had come to respect precision above all else. Rations, drills, and watch rotations were measured down to the minute. Every officer, every enlisted man, knew that their training could mean the difference between obliterating a cruiser or letting it vanish into the Pacific darkness. Unlike earlier in the war, when battles were chaotic, close-range affairs with torpedoes and searchlights, the Missouri represented a new paradigm. The ship herself, a gleaming symbol of American industrial power, embodied this shift. Steel and firepower disciplined by computation, an instrument of destruction whose efficacy depended on intellect as much as muscle. On the Japanese cruiser, Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Tanaka's night watch strained against the ink-black horizon. The crew, experienced from months of island defense and skirmishes across the Philippine Sea, relied on optical rangefinders and visual spotting. They had no radar capable of detecting the incoming threat at such distances. At 19 miles, the Missouri's guns were already calculating ballistic arcs that would bring their shells to precise impact points without a single visual cue. The contrast could not have been starker, one side trusting centuries of seafaring intuition, the other a new doctrine built on electronics, measurement, and human discipline shaped to complement machine capability. In the plotting room, The fire control officer verified the computed solution. Elevation, bearing, powder charge, wind corrections, barometric pressure, and even the subtle effects of Earth's rotation. Every variable accounted for, cross-checked, and reconciled with the ship's radar data. "Solution ready," he reported. Captain William Halsey, commanding from the bridge, nodded subtly. There would be no hesitation, no waiting for visual confirmation, no reliance on luck. The first salvo would speak for itself. At 2,202 hours, the Missouri's guns thundered. The shock waves rolled across the deck, hurling dust and sound into the night, yet the crew barely flinched. They had rehearsed this hundreds of times, felt the vibrations, watched the clocks tick, synchronized every action to the instant. Shells, each weighing more than a ton, leapt from the barrels into the darkness. They arced over miles of Pacific water, invisible to human eyes, guided only by mathematics, radar, and experience. On the Japanese cruiser, explosions erupted with horrifying suddenness. The impact pattern was precise, confirming the Missouri's calculations: hull breaches, secondary explosions, and the rapid loss of operational capability. 4 salvos later, the cruiser was effectively neutralized, her crew scrambling for damage control against an enemy they could neither see nor predict. The psychological shock on the Japanese bridge was immediate. Sailors trained to trust observation now confronted a reality they had no doctrine to explain. "How can they strike without seeing us?" one officer reportedly muttered, a question that captured the bewilderment of an entire culture of naval warfare. The principles they had held for decades, optical superiority, night experience, the tactical advantage of human judgment, were rendered obsolete by the silent precision of radar-guided gunnery. The Missouri had demonstrated, in mere minutes, that night combat no longer belonged to experience alone. It belonged to the one who could measure, calculate, and act with unerring exactness. Meanwhile, on Missouri, the officers reviewed the radar screens with calm efficiency. There was no exultation, no spectacle. Each impact, each destroyed section of the cruiser was merely confirmation of training, preparation, and discipline. They knew the irony was profound. An enormous battleship, a symbol of American brute force, had achieved surgical precision at distances previously thought impossible. The doctrine that had governed the Pacific War for decades, the primacy of sight, instinct, and proximity, had been quietly, utterly upended in a single engagement. By the end of the night, the Japanese cruiser was a wreck, drifting under the dim stars, her operational capacity extinguished. USS Missouri, unscathed and precise, returned to patrol, her crew already preparing logs, reports, and calculations for future engagements. In the larger context of the Pacific War, this encounter would not change the outcome of the conflict alone, but it crystallized a shift that would define naval warfare forever. Radar, once experimental and mistrusted, had proven its dominance. Human intuition, once inviolable, had been challenged by the cold certainty of mathematics and engineering. And in that quiet, lethal demonstration, the psychological shift for both sides was profound. The rules of engagement, long considered immutable, had been rewritten. The hours following the initial engagement were marked by a disciplined silence aboard the Missouri. In the plotting room, officers recalibrated the fire control solutions for potential secondary targets, yet the mood was almost clinical rather than celebratory. Every crew member understood that success in the Pacific depended on repetition, reliability, and absolute trust in the instruments that now guided them. This was not the chaos of a naval battle defined by luck or visual spotting. This was the era of precision warfare, in which preparation and measurement dictated outcomes more than courage alone. The Mark 8 radar system at the heart of Missouri's operations was an engineering marvel of its time. Mounted high above the main deck, its antennae rotated with measured regularity, emitting pulses of radio energy that bounced off every object within the sensor's range. The radar operators interpreted these echoes as blips on the scope, transforming intangible radio waves into actionable intelligence. Unlike optical systems, which relied entirely on light and visibility, the radar's accuracy was unaffected by darkness, smoke, or weather, and could provide exact range, bearing, and movement data in near real time. The integration of radar with the range-keeping computers was equally critical. Each shell fired by Missouri's 16-inch guns required precise calculations. The trajectory had to account for distance, wind, temperature, barometric pressure, Coriolis effect, and the roll and pitch of the ship itself. Before radar, such calculations were limited by human estimation and visual observation, introducing unavoidable errors. With radar data feeding directly into the computers, these variables were automatically reconciled, allowing the gun crews to fire with a degree of precision previously unattainable at night or in poor visibility. Lieutenant Commander Whitman and his team had drilled relentlessly to exploit this technological advantage. Every night, they ran exercises simulating targets at maximum effective range, coordinating between radar operators, plotting rooms, and gun directors. The process was meticulous. Operators tracked the target on the radar scope, transmitted the range and bearing to the plotting room, where computers generated firing solutions, which were then communicated to the gun turrets for execution. Drills emphasized timing and communication, and any discrepancy, even a fraction of a second, could translate into hundreds of yards of error at 19 miles. By July 19th, 1945, these exercises were no longer theoretical. They were about to determine whether the Missouri could engage an enemy cruiser with surgical precision. Across the water, the Japanese cruiser had endured the initial salvo, and the crew was struggling to comprehend their predicament. Traditional doctrine had emphasized evasive maneuvers once under fire, assuming that visual detection would trigger defensive responses. But the Missouri's attacks came without warning, without sighting. The Japanese gunners fired intermittently, hoping to locate the source, but the enemy remained invisible, guided by instruments the Japanese had yet to encounter. Officers on the bridge struggled to reconcile the sudden destruction with the limitations of their training. Night fighting, once their domain, had become an exercise in helplessness against a foe who could see without seeing, calculate without observing, strike without revealing. Missouri's second salvo, fired just minutes after the first, confirmed the precision of the system. Observers in the plotting room noted the immediate correspondence between radar solution and impact. The Japanese cruiser's main deck and superstructure were shredded in exact locations targeted by the fire control computers. Reports later indicated that the first 4 salvos struck the cruiser's magazine, forward turrets, and engineering compartments with unerring accuracy, disabling the vessel's offensive and defensive capabilities. Each salvo required coordination of over 200 sailors, yet the process flowed like clockwork, a choreography of steel and calculation. The psychological impact on Missouri's crew was profound, though understated. Unlike earlier generations of battleship crews, who measured success by close-range duels or visual confirmation, these sailors now measured success by numbers and results on a screen. Lieutenant Commander Whitman later recounted that the bridge was eerily calm, despite the destruction unfolding miles away. The crew's training had instilled confidence in their instruments, replacing instinct with trust in technology. The lesson was clear: preparation, precision, and discipline could produce effects that were impossible to achieve through courage alone. The aftermath of the engagement revealed further dimensions of the tactical shift. Radar had not only enabled the Missouri to engage a target at unprecedented distance, but had also allowed the ship to avoid exposing itself unnecessarily. Previous naval doctrine dictated that battleships close the range to ensure hits, often subjecting themselves to return fire. On July 19th, 1945, Missouri's main battery achieved lethality without compromising safety. The combination of radar detection, range-keeping calculations, and high-explosive and armor-piercing shells rendered the traditional advantages of night maneuvers and concealment obsolete. For the Japanese, the encounter illustrated a bitter truth. The principles that had guided generations of sailors could no longer guarantee survival against an opponent capable of measuring and predicting with near-perfect accuracy. The engineering constraints behind the Missouri's success were significant. Each 16-inch gun weighed over 100 tons and required careful coordination of recoil management, elevation mechanisms, and shell handling. A single error in shell preparation could result in a misfire or catastrophic damage to the turret. The ammunition itself, including armor-piercing shells with specially calibrated fuses, was stored in magazines deep within the ship, protected by blast doors and handling protocols to prevent accidental detonation. The fire control system had to account not only for trajectory, but also for the ship's roll and pitch caused by wind and wave action. Every variable was reconciled in milliseconds, producing firing solutions that were mathematically optimized for maximum effectiveness. Missouri's crew had internalized these details as part of daily life. Meals, rest periods, and watch rotations were meticulously scheduled to ensure that operators were alert during critical periods. Engineers maintained the electrical systems and hydraulic mechanisms with obsessive care, knowing that even minor malfunctions could disrupt the chain of coordination. In this sense, the victory at 19 miles was as much a reflection of organizational discipline and human reliability as it was of technological capability. The engagement also had broader implications for naval doctrine. By demonstrating the effectiveness of radar-directed gunnery, Missouri challenged the assumption that surface combat required visual contact. Previously, fleets had relied on sight, searchlights, and optical rangefinders, with night engagements favoring those trained in close-quarters tactics. The Missouri proved that distance, precision, and technology could supplant these advantages, rendering the old tactical paradigms obsolete. This realization would resonate far beyond the Pacific, influencing post-war naval strategy and the integration of electronics into combat operations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Personal accounts from crew members highlighted the human dimension of this shift. Petty Officer Samuel Hayes, a radar operator on the Missouri, later described the moment of the first salvo. "We watched the blips on the screen, and then the reports came in direct hits. There was no cheering, no shouting, just an understanding that what we had trained for worked exactly as we hoped. It felt almost unreal." Such reflections underscore the psychological shift involved. Success was no longer measured by proximity or bravery alone. It was defined by mastery over instruments, calculation, and procedure. The Japanese survivors of the cruiser's engagement faced a different kind of reckoning. Officers who had relied on visual detection and night experience were forced to confront a new reality. The enemy could strike with deadly accuracy without revealing itself. Reports collected after the war indicated that this encounter, along with other radar-directed strikes, induced profound caution and even fear among remaining Japanese naval units. The centuries-old reliance on intuition and visibility had been supplanted by a system where unseen forces, mathematics, and disciplined execution dictated outcomes. It was a psychological shift as much as a tactical one, altering the way Japanese naval doctrine approached night engagements for the remainder of the conflict. In practical terms, the Missouri's victory reinforced the strategic value of combining industrial might, technological innovation, and rigorous training. The ship represented an intersection of these elements: mass-produced steel, the ingenuity of radar and fire control computers, and sailors trained to interpret, trust, and act on electronic data. Together, these factors allowed a single battleship to neutralize a target at 19 miles with 4 calculated salvos, an achievement that would have been inconceivable under older doctrines of visual range combat. By the following morning, USS Missouri's crew had returned to routine patrols, maintaining readiness for any additional threats. The Japanese cruiser, incapacitated and drifting, served as a stark testament to the changing nature of naval warfare. For the crew, the engagement became a point of reflection on the evolving rules of combat. They understood that the war was no longer solely a contest of courage or intuition. It was increasingly a test of preparation, calculation, and the ability to integrate human and technological capabilities seamlessly. In the larger scope of the Pacific theater, this incident exemplified a broader trend. Battleships, once symbols of brute force and visual dominance, were now instruments of precision warfare. Radar, computation, and disciplined human execution could create decisive outcomes at ranges previously considered unattainable. For historians and military strategists, the engagement became a case study in the psychological, tactical, and technical dimensions of modern naval combat. How trust in instruments could replace reliance on sight, how preparation and coordination could outmatch traditional experience, and how technology could redefine the rules of engagement almost overnight. As the Missouri continued its patrols, the crew maintained a measured awareness of the lesson the night had imparted. Precision was not an abstraction, it was a tangible force capable of shaping the course of engagements and challenging centuries of naval doctrine. The 4 salvos that destroyed a Japanese cruiser at 19 miles were more than a tactical success. They were a demonstration of how the integration of human discipline and technological mastery could redefine what was possible at sea. The psychological irony lingered. A massive battleship, an instrument of raw power, had achieved surgical accuracy without ever visually engaging the enemy. This convergence of human and machine, planning and execution, marked a turning point in naval history, one that would influence fleet engagements for decades to come. The Missouri's radar operators remained vigilant long after the last shell had struck the Japanese cruiser. Each blip on the scope was scrutinized, each echo interpreted, as the crew prepared for potential follow-up threats. Unlike previous engagements in the Pacific, where visual sightings or searchlights dictated reactions, the Missouri's crew relied entirely on the electronic precision of their instruments. Every watchstander understood that the battle had not been won by luck or sheer firepower. It had been won by the disciplined fusion of technology, mathematics, and human execution. The Japanese cruiser, incapacitated and silent, drifted like a ghost in the faint phosphorescence of the Pacific. The ship's propulsion systems were destroyed, the bridge was partially obliterated, and the aft turrets rendered inoperative. Reports later confirmed that the Missouri's 4 salvos had landed with remarkable accuracy, striking the forward magazine, engine room, and command areas in succession. Secondary explosions were visible even from distant observation posts, confirming the devastating efficacy of radar-directed fire. For the crew of the Missouri, the engagement was a textbook demonstration of how preparation and coordination could produce overwhelming results at extreme distances. Every aspect of the Missouri's operation had been calibrated for this moment. The ship's main battery turrets required a seamless chain of action. Gun crews loaded the massive shells, powder crews ensured precise propellant charges, and range calculations were continually adjusted to account for environmental variables. Even minor deviations in wind speed or shell weight could reduce accuracy, so constant verification was necessary. Radar provided the initial targeting data, but it was the disciplined execution by hundreds of sailors that translated these calculations into destructive impact. In the plotting room, the integration of radar with range-keeping computers proved indispensable. Data from the Mark 8 radar was fed into analog computers that calculated elevation and bearing for each gun. Operators corrected for ship movement, projectile weight, atmospheric pressure, and the curvature of the Earth over long distances. These complex calculations, which would have taken minutes using older methods, were completed in real time, allowing the guns to fire within seconds of receiving updated data. The result was a level of precision previously unattainable, particularly during night operations, when visual confirmation of target location was impossible. The Japanese crew, meanwhile, was unable to respond effectively. Night engagement tactics that had proven successful in earlier battles, reliance on searchlights, optical rangefinders, and evasive maneuvers, were rendered obsolete. The Missouri struck from a distance beyond visual confirmation, and the cruiser's crew was forced into ad hoc damage control with limited success. Many sailors later reported the disorienting effect of being under fire without ever seeing the enemy. The psychological impact of this inability to detect the source of fire was profound, reinforcing a growing sense that the old rules of naval engagement were failing. In terms of physical effects, the Missouri's salvos produced precisely calculated destruction. The forward magazine received 2 direct hits, causing catastrophic damage to ammunition storage and eliminating the threat of secondary explosions from nearby shells. The engine compartment, struck by another salvo, disabled the cruiser's propulsion, ensuring she could no longer maneuver or retreat. The 4th salvo impacted the bridge and aft turrets, disrupting command and control and rendering the ship effectively combat ineffective. Each strike corresponded to data generated in the plotting room and verified by radar, highlighting the unprecedented accuracy achieved at a range of 19 miles. The crew's discipline extended beyond firing operations. Damage control teams were on standby, prepared to respond to unexpected counterattacks or secondary hazards. Engineers continuously monitored the hydraulic and electrical systems that powered the turrets and radar, ensuring uninterrupted functionality. Even in the tense moments of engagement, the Missouri operated with remarkable composure and coordination, demonstrating the integration of human skill and technological advantage. This battle marked a turning point in naval doctrine. The traditional emphasis on sight, proximity, and experience had been supplanted by the combination of electronics, computation, and disciplined human execution. Where Japanese forces had relied on visual detection and intuition, the Missouri's precision demonstrated that advanced instrumentation could achieve decisive results without revealing the ship's position or requiring close engagement. Radar had transitioned from experimental tool to strategic weapon, fundamentally altering the dynamics of surface combat. For historians, the engagement provided a clear example of how technology could shift the balance of power. While battleships had long been symbols of raw firepower, the Missouri exemplified the new reality that accuracy, coordination, and technological integration could outweigh sheer size or traditional night-fighting expertise. The ship's actions at 19 miles were more than a tactical victory. They represented a doctrinal shift that would influence naval operations long after the war. First-hand accounts from Missouri's crew underscore this evolution. Petty Officer Leonard Carter, a radar technician, later recalled, "We weren't just firing guns, we were executing a calculation. Every movement was anticipated, every shot determined before it left the barrel. It was almost clinical, but it worked perfectly." These reflections highlight the psychological transformation within the crew. Confidence now stemmed from mastery over instruments and procedures, rather than reliance on instinct or courage alone. The Japanese response, or lack thereof, further emphasized the changing nature of naval warfare. Crews trained for centuries in visual detection and night maneuvers were now vulnerable to precise strikes beyond their ability to observe or react. Reports collected post-war indicate that the incident contributed to an increasing caution among Japanese units, instilling recognition that radar-directed engagements could render traditional tactics ineffective. Night battles, once their domain, had become a domain of measurement and mathematics, not experience. Operationally, the Missouri's crew quickly verified the results of their engagement using radar and lookout confirmations. The cruiser's movement ceased entirely, and damage assessments indicated that she would be unable to participate in any further operations without extensive repairs. Meanwhile, the Missouri remained fully combat-ready, her systems tested under actual conditions, and her crew further trained in the seamless integration of radar, computation, and human execution. The engagement also highlighted logistical and technological sophistication. The Mark 8 radar, while advanced, required constant calibration and maintenance. Operators had to compensate for signal degradation, interference, and environmental factors, such as humidity or precipitation. The range-keeping computers required careful adjustment for shell weight variances and wear in turret mechanisms. Every component of the process depended on meticulous preparation and continuous attention, illustrating that technology alone was insufficient without disciplined human oversight. By the conclusion of the night, USS Missouri had not only destroyed a significant enemy asset, but also validated a new paradigm for naval warfare. The integration of radar, fire control, computation, and disciplined crew execution enabled a degree of precision, lethality, and safety previously unattainable. The engagement at 19 miles represented a shift from intuition-based combat to calculated, instrument-driven warfare, redefining the psychological and tactical landscape for both sides. The Japanese cruiser's incapacitation underscored the practical implications of this shift. Officers who had relied on traditional methods were forced to acknowledge that visual detection and tactical experience could no longer ensure survival. This awareness had lasting consequences for Japanese naval operations, influencing their approach to subsequent engagements and contributing to the erosion of confidence in established doctrines. For Missouri's crew, the night became a benchmark in operational proficiency. Reports, logs, and after-action reviews documented the precise performance of radar systems, the effectiveness of the range-keeping computers, and the seamless coordination of gun crews. This documentation would inform training protocols, ensuring that the lessons learned were institutionalized and could be replicated across the fleet. The broader strategic implications were equally significant. By demonstrating the capacity to engage and destroy targets at extreme distances with high precision, Missouri exemplified the advantages of integrating technological innovation into traditional naval power structures. Battleships no longer relied solely on armor, firepower, or aggressive maneuvering. They could now leverage data, computation, and disciplined execution to achieve strategic outcomes with minimal exposure. In reflective accounts after the war, naval historians emphasized that the Missouri's engagement illustrated the psychological as well as tactical dimension of this shift. American crews gained confidence in instruments and procedure, while Japanese forces experienced disorientation and demoralization in response to strikes that defied traditional understanding. The lesson was clear. In modern naval warfare, mastery of measurement and calculation could redefine outcomes as decisively as courage or numbers once had. By dawn, Missouri continued her patrol, maintaining readiness for any follow-up threats. The cruiser, incapacitated and drifting, served as a stark reminder of the evolving nature of combat at sea. Officers and crew internalized the significance of the night's events. Victory was no longer determined solely by proximity, intuition, or experience. It was now shaped by the disciplined integration of human and technological capabilities. The 4 salvos at 19 miles exemplified this transformation, signaling the emergence of a new era in naval warfare, where precision, preparation, and instrumentation dictated outcomes once thought impossible. By the early hours of July 20th, 1945, the immediate engagement with the Japanese cruiser had concluded, but the significance of the action extended far beyond the isolated tactical success. USS Missouri had demonstrated what few naval officers of the era could fully comprehend, that technology, discipline, and meticulous human execution could eclipse decades of traditional doctrine. The cruiser, now immobile and heavily damaged, symbolized the obsolescence of tactics rooted in visual detection and night combat experience. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. On the Japanese side, surviving officers attempted damage control with limited success, but the underlying reality was clear. They had encountered an adversary who could strike without ever being seen, a foe whose accuracy rendered proximity and maneuvering insufficient for survival. For crews trained in the doctrines of night engagements honed over decades, reinforced by repeated victories, the encounter represented a shocking paradigm shift. Historians later noted that this and similar radar-directed engagements induced a growing sense of caution and hesitancy among Japanese units, contributing to a strategic disadvantage that compounded over the final months of the Pacific War. The Missouri's crew, meanwhile, moved with quiet professionalism. Reports were logged, ammunition and fuel inventories updated, and radar systems recalibrated. There was no immediate celebration. The crew had internalized a discipline that emphasized operational continuity over ostentation. Petty Officer Leonard Carter later reflected, "We didn't feel triumph. We felt responsibility. Every success meant we had to be ready to repeat it. There was no room for error." This sentiment encapsulated the evolving mindset of modern naval warfare. Success was measured in precision, reliability, and the seamless execution of complex procedures rather than dramatic heroics or close-range duels. In practical terms, the engagement reinforced the operational doctrine that had been developing on Missouri and similar vessels throughout the Pacific theater. Battleships were no longer purely instruments of brute force. They were platforms for integrated systems where electronic sensing, data computation, and human discipline converged. Radar, once considered experimental, had proven capable of delivering precise targeting solutions at extreme distances, and the crew's meticulous execution had validated theoretical models under real combat conditions. The implications for fleet strategy were immediate. Future engagements could rely on standoff precision rather than direct visual contact, reducing exposure to enemy fire while maximizing lethality. The technological dimension of this paradigm shift was equally significant. The Mark 8 fire control radar and its integration with range-keeping computers represented the cutting edge of analog computation. Operators had to monitor signal integrity, adjust for environmental factors, and account for mechanical wear in both radar and gun systems. Each gun turret required careful synchronization of elevation, bearing, and powder charge, with even minor deviations potentially resulting in miss or catastrophic malfunction. The successful engagement against the Japanese cruiser demonstrated the capacity to manage this complexity under combat conditions, proving the reliability of the system and the proficiency of the crew. Missouri's success also underscored the importance of disciplined training and preparation. For months prior to the engagement, the crew had practiced simulated target acquisition, fire control coordination, and rapid response procedures. These drills instilled an almost instinctive understanding of the interplay between radar operators, plotting rooms, and gun crews. Unlike previous generations of naval battles, which relied on intuition and immediate visual feedback, the Missouri exemplified a culture of anticipatory calculation. The crew had rehearsed every possible variable and executed them flawlessly in real conditions. This level of preparation transformed what could have been a chaotic night engagement into a precise, controlled operation. The psychological dimension of the engagement warrants particular attention. Japanese crews, accustomed to relying on visual detection and tactical judgment, faced a form of warfare that invalidated centuries of operational experience. Reports indicate that officers questioned whether survival was possible when confronted with an enemy capable of calculating firing solutions at extreme ranges without revealing its position. This erosion of confidence affected subsequent Japanese operations, instilling caution that limited aggressive maneuvers and constrained tactical initiative. In contrast, American crews gained confidence in their instruments, reinforcing a doctrine that emphasized precision, trust in technology, and disciplined execution over instinct or experience. Beyond the immediate tactical consequences, the engagement had broader strategic significance. The ability to neutralize a cruiser at 19 miles with 4 salvos demonstrated that American naval power was not solely dependent on numerical superiority or the courage of its sailors. Instead, it showcased the value of integrating industrial capacity, technological innovation, and human discipline. Battleships were no longer merely instruments of intimidation. They were precision platforms capable of exerting control over engagements at ranges that had previously been considered unattainable. This represented a decisive evolution in naval warfare, one that would influence post-war strategy and the development of future fleet operations. The engagement also reinforced lessons regarding logistical and operational planning. Maintaining combat readiness at such a level required constant attention to ammunition stocks, mechanical reliability, and personnel rotation. Engineers monitored hydraulic systems, gun barrel wear, and radar calibration. Gunners rehearsed loading sequences with exacting precision. Radar operators maintained vigilance over blips and echoes that could indicate emerging threats. Every aspect of the ship's operation had to function in harmony, emphasizing the symbiotic relationship between human skill and technological capability. Historical analysis confirms that the Missouri's actions were not an isolated demonstration, but part of a broader evolution in naval doctrine. Radar-directed gunnery, once experimental, became a cornerstone of American fleet operations, enabling precision strikes under conditions that would have previously favored the Japanese Navy. The engagement at 19 miles exemplified the culmination of decades of technological development, meticulous crew training, and doctrinal innovation. It highlighted the ways in which industrial capacity and human ingenuity could combine to overcome traditional tactical advantages and redefine the rules of combat. For the crew of Missouri, the long-term significance was understood in practical rather than celebratory terms. Officer after officer emphasized that success depended on repetition, vigilance, and continuous refinement of procedures. The engagement with the Japanese cruiser validated months of preparation but also underscored the responsibility inherent in wielding such precision. Every operator, every gunner, and every officer recognized that mastery over instruments imposed a moral and operational obligation. Precision could destroy, but only discipline ensured that it did so reliably and effectively. The engagement also left a legacy in naval training and doctrine that extended well beyond the immediate war. Post-war analyses emphasized the importance of integrating sensors, computation, and human discipline into fleet operations. Training programs were adjusted to emphasize not only mechanical proficiency, but also the interpretation and application of data in real time. The lessons of Missouri's night engagement informed naval tactics, ship design, and officer education for decades, shaping the evolution of modern surface warfare. In reflective terms, the incident also illustrates a profound historical irony. The battleship, often viewed as the pinnacle of brute force in naval warfare, had become an instrument of surgical precision. The Missouri's guns, capable of hurling massive shells over vast distances, were now guided by mathematics, radar, and human coordination rather than direct observation or instinct. A platform designed for dominance through power alone had achieved its greatest lethality through the disciplined integration of human skill and technological innovation. This irony underscores the broader narrative of the Pacific War. Victories were increasingly determined not merely by courage or firepower, but by preparation, adaptation, and the capacity to leverage emerging technologies effectively. From a broader historical perspective, the engagement exemplifies the intersection of human psychology, doctrine, and technology. The Missouri's crew internalized a philosophy in which success was defined by mastery over systems and procedures, while the Japanese forces faced a cognitive dissonance that challenged deeply held beliefs about night combat and naval superiority. The event illustrates how technology can shift not only tactical outcomes but also the perception of what is possible in warfare, forcing combatants to re-evaluate established doctrines and adapt or face obsolescence. In the years following the war, the Missouri became emblematic of this transformation. Naval historians, examining the ship's engagements, highlighted the significance of radar-directed gunnery and the disciplined execution of complex procedures. Veterans of the ship's crew reflected on the precision, coordination, and preparation that characterized the engagement with the Japanese cruiser as a defining moment in their careers, one that demonstrated the effectiveness of human and technological integration in modern combat. The Japanese cruiser, destroyed and incapacitated, became a symbol of the limitations of traditional doctrine in the face of technological advancement. For Japanese naval planners, the engagement was a cautionary example. Reliance on visual detection, experience, and night fighting skill could no longer guarantee success. The encounter contributed to a strategic recalibration, albeit too late to alter the trajectory of the war, emphasizing the increasing primacy of technology and integrated systems in determining outcomes. Ultimately, the engagement at 19 miles underscores a central truth about the evolution of naval warfare. Success no longer depended solely on the courage of sailors or the size of their guns. It required the disciplined application of training, precise coordination between human and technological systems, and the ability to exploit emerging innovations fully. USS Missouri's engagement demonstrated that mastery over these elements could yield decisive outcomes, redefine tactical paradigms, and leave a lasting imprint on the conduct of naval operations. Reflecting on the broader implications, the story of Missouri and the Japanese cruiser is emblematic of the late Pacific War. a period in which industrial capacity, technological innovation, and disciplined human execution combined to create outcomes that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. The engagement illustrates the psychological shift experienced by both sides. American sailors gained confidence in instruments and procedure, while Japanese officers confronted the obsolescence of long-held doctrines. The night's events serve as a microcosm of the transformative impact of radar, computation, and disciplined preparation on modern naval warfare. The Missouri's legacy, as revealed in this engagement, is therefore twofold. First, it demonstrates the operational effectiveness of integrated systems, proving that technology and human skill can combine to achieve unprecedented precision. Second, it highlights the psychological and doctrinal impact of such systems on adversaries, emphasizing that mastery over innovation can redefine strategic and tactical landscapes. In the quiet aftermath of July 19th, 1945, these lessons were already being absorbed, shaping the future of naval operations and establishing the Missouri as a vessel not only of power, but of precision, foresight, and enduring historical significance. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.